Welcome to the Kiepersol Texas Podcast. My name is Michael Roth, and today I am with Emily up at the Distillery here at Kiepersol. We have a very special podcast for you that's going to be a kind of a fun adventure to kind of go down for especially a lot of you that like spirits or like making cocktails at home. Emily, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long have you been a bartender?
I have been a bartender for about 4 years, going on my fifth year this year. I started bartending, really bartending at the Grove, and I learned a lot of how to make classic cocktails, as well as like how to be a part of mixology, because it's different in itself than like creating a classic cocktail. Mixology kind of lets you be creative in your own right. I began in the service industry in 2012, and I was a server for a really long time. And then I decided, I saw all the bartenders doing these cool things with drinks and how they could create, something green and sour and it'd be amazing as a martini. I thought that that'd be the coolest thing to learn how to do. And so I started bartending at a Mexican restaurant doing frozen margaritas. And it was really easy because all I had to do was pull a lever, so I didn't really learn anything. But I got my foot in the door because, once you're a bartender, you can pretty much bartend anywhere. I then used that as a stepping stone to start at the Grove, and I worked my way through more like a speed bar area up into the cocktail bar.
So what's the difference between like a cocktail bar and a speed bar?
Speed bar is going to be more of your call drinks, your bourbon and Coke, or your vodka cranberry, something like that. You know the clientele coming in, and you know that that's what they're going to want is something quick and fast, and so they're going to tell you what they want pretty much immediately. Whereas in a cocktail bar, it's something that you're constructing and you're making. And so you have a drink menu usually in a cocktail bar. Well, there'll be, an old fashioned or a Manhattan, and you look through the list, and then they sit and they construct it in front of you. So it's really cool because it's more about the experience in a cocktail bar than it is the speed of the drink, I guess. You're not sitting there going into a cocktail bar expecting them to hand you a drink in about 2 seconds.
Seems like that's something that a lot of people are starting to take a lot more interest in at home as well. So I'm kind of curious, do you have any tips on people that maybe like to make cocktails at home? Sure, they can go to the bar and they can order cocktails and those are fun, but what is the process of making a cocktail look like?
So I think that there's a few different steps you need to consider when you're making it. And the first one would be that there are 4 basic elements of a flavor. So the first thing you need to understand is the 4 basic elements of a drink, which are going to be the 4 flavor elements are sweet, salty, sour, and savory. You can think of savory as bitter. Most of the savory or bitter aspects are also herbal. It's mostly derived from plants. And then we have the complementary flavor, which is going to be spicy. It's not something that you need in a drink, but it'll enhance it to an extent. It's also something that's more of a personal preference. When you're making a cocktail, you want to construct it with 3 of those elements in mind, so that way they equally enhance each other without canceling each other out. So if you're looking at something sweet and sour, you don't want to try to figure out if it's overly sour or overly sweet. You can cancel that aspect out by adding a 3rd element. So when you're adding a 3rd element, you can do sweet, sour, and salty. You could do sweet, sour, and bitter, or bitter, salty, sweet. It doesn't really matter which 3 you choose, as long as you're using them to enhance the other flavors, instead of just pairing sugar versus sour. Because then you're trying to cancel one of them out, because one of them will always overpower the other. There is no fine line between the 2. So if you're using a 3rd element to enhance it, then you're not worried about canceling out a sweetness and a sour. You're now adding, salty. So a good example of that would be what they call a salty dog. It's a grapefruit, vodka, and salt rim. So you've got, the grapefruit is more citrusy. They do put vodka is sometimes sweeter. You can use a sweeter vodka if you prefer. Sometimes they will do sugar on like a simple syrup on the rim to stick the salt on. So then you've got the sweet, the salty, and the sour inside. And it keeps it from being just one element over the other.
Can you give us an example of what an original cocktail that you've made that kind of encompasses these ideas?
In the distillery, we've created what is called the Winter Rose. It uses bourbon is the spirit base. We have added the elements of rose water which is going to be your herbal or savory note to it. It does have a really sweet smell, but it's very bitter to the taste. And then we added apple cider, which is a sweeter, almost citrusy, but it's sweeter on the flavor profile. And we created a rosemary simple syrup, which balances the bitter and the sweet together. Lemon juice as well, with the addition of cranberry to give it the added coloring for it. It gives it that unique rose color for the winter rose. When you mix all of those together, you're not getting something that's overly sweet, because the simple sugar, which was made with rosemary, already balances those two elements together. And then the rosemary enhances the rose water because it's two bitter elements, but they come together with the sugar to just create something rich and unique. Pairing it all with bourbon, we decided to go with bourbon instead of like vodka or rum, because our bourbon does have sweeter notes to it, like a hint of vanilla and toffee, so you're kind of throwing those two things into the mixture as well, and it pairs very well with each other. It's amazing.
So it sounds like when you're constructing, you're mainly focused on whatever the base spirit is first, right? And then from there, you're able to add things and change accordingly. Adding rose water, for example, to the bourbon, it helps kind of balance some things out. What I'm trying to ask, I guess, is so if we were to, let's say, change out the bourbon for rum, it's going to be a completely different experience, right? Because of the base spirit.
It would be a completely different experience because most rums are sugar-based, and so it's going to be more, you're adding more sugar to it. So it's going to almost diminish the rose water being in it. And if it doesn't diminish it completely, it's going to have a weird taste it won't pair as well, if that makes sense. So by taking the bourbon, which ours has a little bit of the sweet elements to it, but bourbon is constructed with grains, that's the base of it. So it's going to be more of not necessarily herbal, but it is more earthy. It's going to be bold. We had to blend that together to perfectly enhance each other, with the understanding that it would be enhanced by a bourbon. So if you wanted to use a rum, you could, but you would have to reconstruct the entire drink. So instead of saying, we use 2 ounces of rose water, you might have to use 4 ounces to really bring that in. So you would have to reconstruct everything and go about it differently based on the spirit you're going to use.
Yeah, so it sounds like being a bartender and constructing a cocktail is using science to basically have an art form that creates an experience for someone, both in presentation and in what they experience. So it sounds like what the goal is when you're constructing a cocktail is that you want balance when you experience it, when you consume the spirit, or the cocktail I should say, it hits multiple facets of what we taste.
Yes.
Okay.
You don't want to just taste one thing. You want to be able to sit through and sort out the different flavors that you're tasting. It's kind of like when you're eating a meal. If you go to a restaurant and they've got lemon herb chicken, you're expecting 2 different elements in that besides the chicken. You're expecting lemon, you're expecting herbs. You don't want something that's going to taste like only lemons. You're not going to want something that tastes like nothing but seasonings. You want that perfect balance. And I think that when you're constructing a cocktail, it's very similar to creating a meal. You have to add the science of adding each ingredient to the right amount. You don't want to overdo it in any one aspect, but you can also have fun with it too. It's all about experimentation. It is like science. It's about playing around with the different amounts that you put in with something until you find that perfect balance. But there needs to be a balance.
Something I've noticed personally is that the old-fashioned has come back around in popularity. I know it's been around forever, but it seems like a lot more people are becoming aware of it. Can you talk a little bit about the construction of an old-fashioned and how it meets this idea of balance?
First thing with an old-fashioned is that it's going to be used with whiskey. For the most part, people prefer rye whiskey because it is more bold and dry, so it's going to have that bitter element without being straight bitters. It has the savory aspect. So you've got that going for it. And then with everything else you're constructing, you go through and you think, if I have something that's already so bold and savory in one aspect. What can I do to enhance that? What they started doing in the, when they first created the old fashioned is they took a raw sugar cube and they placed it at the bottom of the glass and they put, bitters on top of it because they were thinking, I don't want something too sweet to mix with my savory element. I want to balance it out. So they put a whole sugar cube and they would put bitters, which are essentially just herbs taken and diluted with water. You have that muddled at the bottom of the glass. You pour your whiskey on top. You stir it with ice to lightly dilute it with water. You don't want to overly diffuse the flavor profile by adding water, so you add ice and then you stir it to break up the little parts of the ice to help dilute it. And then at the very end, what we've seen in the progression of things is that they've started doing what's called a flamed orange. And what they do is they take the orange peel or the rind of an orange and they heat it with a match. You just heat the back of it to release the juice that's under the rind of the orange, and it comes out at the top and you shoot it through the flames over the drink to add a little bit of the citrus into the drink, but you're not adding orange juice, you're adding just the flavor of it. And then you take the rind that's now been flamed and you rub the edge of the glass so that way when you're going to drink the cocktail, you're getting citrus element or a sour element, but it's not even in the drink per se. So it's about balance, but it's also about tricking your mouth into believing that there's balance in there. It's become a very popular drink now because they figured out so many different ways to break down the sugar. So now most places use a simple syrup, which is sugar that has been diffused in water. And so it's thicker, but it's also more measurable. So you can choose, if you're using a bourbon, bourbons are sweeter whiskeys. You're not going to want to use very much simple sugar in there at all. So you might do 1/4 of an ounce. Whereas if you're using a rye whiskey that's been aged for 18 years, it's going to be more dry and bold in its own flavors. So you're going to want to put maybe a little bit more sugar in there. The bitters, they've taken the bitters and they've enhanced those because now instead of the original bitters, which are Angostura bitters, those were the only bitters that were used for years and years and years. And now they've come out with orange bitters, lemon bitters, lavender bitters. And you'll see with old fashions that they're now combining orange bitters and regular bitters together to give that citrus feel without the sour element. We have a lot of things coming down the road. We're still working out. Whenever we create a drink menu, we want to have things that are balanced drinks, such as the winter rose, but we also have to understand too that when you're making cocktails, personal preference plays a lot into it as well. So you want to have drinks that are more sweet for people who prefer sweet drinks. So that's like a White Russian or like a chocolate martini. We're doing a lot of things like that right now for the Valentine's Day that's coming up. And so we've got some sweet drinks being worked on, and then for this coming spring, we've got a few ideas for bourbon-infused drinks, as well as I want to implement some more of the rose water into things because, we are the city of roses, so why not embrace that?
Yeah.
So we're working on trying to find things that pair well.
For those out there that like to drink their spirits neat, straight up, what's the benefit of that? For the people that don't understand, or normally they're used to a mixed cocktail of some sort, or somehow mixing in a spirit, but what's the benefit of drinking a spirit straight compared to mixing it with something?
I think when you drink it straight, you're getting the flavors that were built into it. So when you make a rye whiskey, you're using rye grains and you're aging it over time, but you could be aging it in a white oak barrel, you could be aging it in a used bourbon barrel, you could be aging it in literally any different type of barrel that there is out there, plus you could be adding your own flavors to it, so you could be adding vanilla or toffee or whatever it is that each distiller is adding to their product to make it unique for themselves. By drinking something straight, you're able to sit there and sift out the inner workings of the spirit that you're drinking. And a lot of times, people, when they drink it straight, they're not just drinking it straight. They'll add a drop of water to really release those flavors, or they will put it over ice to chill it, because there is a burn with drinking something straight. It does. A spirit is going to have that little burn that goes down your throat. It's not always pleasant. So a lot of people kind of shy away from drinking things straight because of that. But if you add a drop of water, or you add an ice cube to it, you kind of break that apart, and you can still enjoy the flavors of something neat and just sift through it. People who are drinking wine, the fun part of drinking wine, you get to sit there and see the different flavors. A Pinot Noir is going to taste much different than a Cabernet. You can kind of break apart and see that the Pinot Noir is more fruity, whereas the Cabernet is more dry. And why is that? You can start asking questions from there and start learning more about the things that you like. And the same thing with spirits. The more that you taste and try, the more you're going to learn about yourself. What do I prefer? When you learn what you like, you can then learn to start building cocktails for yourself at the bar. So if I know that personally I love rum. That's my big thing. I know it's a little bit sweet. I prefer our single barrel rum because it's not as sweet. It's broken apart by adding the bourbon barrel to it. But I know that if I go to our restaurant and I'm sitting down, I can look at the bartender and say, hey, I would like a cocktail made with this. Now, what can you add to it to enhance that flavor without getting rid of it completely? A lot of times when people are making cocktails or mixing it with Coke or Sprite, they're diluting the flavor of the spirit because they're trying to mask it. They want the feel, they want the percentage of the alcohol rather than the flavor of it. Trying something neat or experiencing that at least once or twice in your life, you're learning to appreciate what you're drinking for what it is and what it was made from.
When you're either bartending at home or for yourself or in general, it's always good to try to experience new smells, experience new tastes, and figure out all of those different dynamics, and that's what's going to help you understand the 4 basics of constructing a cocktail.
Yes,
okay.
Definitely.
Awesome. If you guys are ever interested in coming out to Kiepersol, this distillery, we're right here, right next to the wine tasting room. It's a full experience. You can come do a tour on Saturdays of both the distillery here and the winery. You get to try some of our spirits. We have very unique cocktails to here at Kiepersol, as well as we have seasonal cocktails that Emily's always trying to construct and be on the cutting edge with and try something new and trying different elements, such as rosewater, as she mentioned earlier, which really is a unique thing, especially here in Tyler, being the Rose City. But please let us know if you're interested in learning more about cocktails or maybe even more about Kiepersol's distillery. Please feel free to leave a comment below or send an email over at social@kiepersol.com. We'd be more than happy to answer your questions, or just come visit us and ask questions of our bartenders here at the distillery at Kiepersol. Well, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Hopefully we'll have you on again soon.